Marcus Chun had been silent for 3 years, for months, and 17 days. Not by choice, but because the neural collar wrapped around his throat made sure of it. The device hummed constantly against his skin, a cold reminder that his voice belonged to the hegemony now, not to him. He sat in the cargo hold of the transport ship Severance, surrounded by 200 other humans. All of them wore the same gray uniforms, the same neural collars, the same empty expressions. They were being shipped to the mining colonies on Kepler 442b, where they would spend the rest of their lives extracting rare metals for their alien masters. The hegemony had conquered Earth 7 years ago with barely a fight. Humanity had put up resistance for maybe 6 months before the major government surrendered. The aliens hadn't come with overwhelming force or devastating weapons. They had simply demonstrated that human technology was like comparing stone tools to plasma rifles. Resistance became pointless when your enemy could disable every electronic device on the planet with a single command pulse. Marcus remembered the day they came for him. He had been Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Chun then, a decorated Marine who had fought in 3 different conflicts before the hegemony arrived. He had been leading a small group of holdouts in the Montana wilderness, using guerrilla tactics to harass the alien occupation forces. For 2 years, his unit had been a thorn in their side, too small to be worth a major operation, but too effective to ignore. Then they found his base. The hegemony forces didn't kill his men. That wasn't their way. Instead, they fitted each surviving human with a neural collar and shipped them off to labor camps. Marcus had watched helplessly as his soldiers were loaded onto transport ships, their minds clouded by the collar's influence, their fighting spirit drained away like water through a sieve. But Marcus was different. The aliens had looked at his service record, studied his tactical innovations, analyzed his leadership capabilities. Instead of sending him straight to a labor camp, they had done something worse. They had made him a specimen. For 3 years, Marcus had been poked, prodded, and studied by hegemony scientists. They wanted to understand what made humans like him so effective in combat. What gave some humans the ability to lead others into battle against impossible odds? How could they identify and neutralize such individuals before they became problems? The experiments had been methodical and thorough. Brain scans while he relived combat memories. Psychological evaluations conducted while under various drugs. Simulated scenarios where they tested his reactions to different stimuli. Through it all, the neural collar had kept him docile, compliant, unable to resist or even speak unless directly commanded to do so. Now, they were done with him. The scientists had learned what they wanted to know, and Marcus was being shipped off to die slowly in the mines. The collar would ensure he never caused trouble again, never inspired others, never became the leader he once was. He would just be another broken human, counting down the days until his body gave out from the brutal labor. The transport ship shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace. Through the small porthole near his bench, Marcus could see Kepler 442b growing larger. It was a brown and gray world, strip-mined and scarred by decades of hegemony operations. Somewhere down there were the mining tunnels that would become his tomb. The other humans around him barely reacted to the sight. The neural collars kept them calm, passive, accepting of their fate. Marcus felt the same artificial tranquility trying to wash over his mind. But something deep inside him still resisted. Not enough to act, not enough to speak, but enough to think. Enough to remember who he had been. A hegemony overseer entered the cargo hold. The creature was tall and lean, with gray skin and large black eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Its species, the Keth, served as administrators and guards throughout the hegemony's vast empire. This one wore the purple markings of a senior overseer, probably in charge of the entire mining operation. "Attention, human workers," the Keth announced in its translated voice. "You will be processed upon landing and assigned to your work details. Compliance with all directives is mandatory. Resistance will result in neural adjustment." Neural adjustment. Marcus knew what that meant. The collars could do more than just silence them. They could rewrite memories, alter personalities, even induce specific behaviors. Humans who underwent neural adjustment came out as hollow shells, their minds scraped clean of everything that had once made them who they were. The transport touched down with a bone-jarring thud. Through the porthole, Marcus could see a sprawling complex of buildings and mining equipment stretching to the horizon. Guard towers topped with energy weapons dotted the perimeter. There would be no escape from this place. The hegemony had learned from their early mistakes with human prisoners. The cargo hold doors opened with a hiss of equalizing atmosphere. The air outside was thin and cold, carrying the acrid smell of industrial chemicals. The humans filed out in orderly rows, their movements synchronized by the neural collars. Marcus found himself in the middle of the group, just another face in the crowd. The processing center was a massive concrete structure that looked like it had been built for efficiency rather than comfort. Inside, humans were sorted into groups based on their physical condition and work assignment. Those deemed too weak for heavy mining were sent to maintenance duties. The stronger ones, including Marcus, were marked for the deep tunnels where the most valuable ores could be found. Each human was scanned by a device that read their neural collars data. When it was Marcus's turn, the scanner lingered longer than usual. The Keth technician operating it frowned and called over the purple-marked overseer. "This one has an unusual designation," the technician reported. "Former military, high-value research subject. Special handling protocols are flagged." The overseer studied Marcus with those large black eyes. The research facility indicated he was to receive standard processing. "Has there been an update to his status?" "Negative. All records show standard labor assignment." "Then proceed. If the researchers were finished with him, there is no reason to deviate from protocol." But Marcus noticed something in the overseer's expression, a flicker of uncertainty. The Keth were bureaucratic by nature, and anything that didn't fit their carefully organized systems made them uncomfortable. His unusual background had raised questions, even if they ultimately decided to proceed as planned. He was assigned to Mining Crew Designation 47C, deep shaft operations on the planet's largest continent. The work would be brutal, extracting crystalline deposits from narrow tunnels hundreds of meters underground. Most humans assigned to deep shaft work lasted less than 2 years before their bodies broke down from the constant strain. As he was led to the transport that would take him to the mining site, Marcus caught sight of something that made his blood run cold. In a separate processing area, a group of aliens were examining a new batch of human prisoners. But these weren't Keth overseers or technicians. These were Vorth, the hegemony's elite warrior caste. The Vorth were massive creatures, standing nearly 3 meters tall with armored exoskeletons and for arms that ended in razor-sharp claws. They were used as shock troops and enforcers, deployed only when the hegemony expected serious trouble. What were they doing at a routine mining operation? One of the Vorth was speaking to the purple-marked overseer, their conversation too distant for Marcus to hear. But he could see the overseer's body language growing more agitated as they talked. Something was happening, something that had the normally calm Keth worried. The transport carrying Marcus's crew rumbled to life, pulling away from the processing center before he could see more. As they drove through the industrial wasteland toward the mining complex, Marcus found himself thinking about what he had witnessed. The hegemony didn't deploy Vorth warriors without good reason. Either they were expecting trouble, or they were planning to cause some. The mining complex was even more depressing up close. Rows of prefabricated barracks stretched between massive excavation sites. Human workers moved like automatons, their neural collars keeping them focused on their tasks while Keth overseers monitored their progress. The whole place had the feel of a machine designed to consume human lives and convert them into profits for the hegemony. Marcus was assigned to Barracks Block 7, a long concrete building that housed 40 workers. Each human had a narrow bunk, a small storage compartment, and nothing else. The neural collars regulated their sleep cycles, ensuring they got exactly the minimum rest needed to maintain productivity. Dreams were suppressed, personal thoughts discouraged, individual identity gradually erased. But as Marcus lay on his assigned bunk that first night, he found that some small part of his mind remained untouched. The collar could control his actions, silence his voice, and numb his emotions, but it couldn't completely eliminate his memories. He still remembered who he had been, what he had fought for, and why the hegemony considered him dangerous. 3 bunks down, a young woman was staring at the ceiling with the same vacant expression as all the others. But Marcus thought he saw something familiar in her face, a ghost of recognition that suggested her mind wasn't completely gone either. How many of the others were like them, trapped inside their own bodies, but still aware? How many former soldiers, leaders, and rebels were hidden among the seemingly compliant workforce? The next morning, work began before dawn. Marcus was assigned to Deep Shaft 15, one of the most dangerous excavation sites on the planet. The tunnels went down nearly a kilometer, following veins of rare crystals that the hegemony used in their advanced technology. The work required humans to crawl through spaces too narrow for their alien masters, using handheld extractors to chip away at the crystal formations. The conditions were hellish. The air was thick with dust and chemical vapors. The temperature swung between freezing and scalding depending on proximity to the planet's geothermal vents. Cave-ins were common, and injured workers were simply left behind if they couldn't keep up. Marcus found himself working alongside a diverse group of humans. There was Elena Rodriguez, the woman he had noticed the night before, who turned out to be a former NASA engineer. David Kim had been a special forces operator with the South Korean military. Sarah Mitchell was a former CIA analyst who had been captured while organizing resistance cells. All of them wore the same neural collars, but Marcus began to notice subtle signs that their minds weren't completely suppressed. A meaningful glance here, a deliberately dropped tool there, small acts of defiance that wouldn't trigger the collar's control protocols. They were all fighting the same internal battle, trying to maintain some spark of their former selves while appearing completely broken to their captors. On his 3rd day in the mines, Marcus witnessed something that changed everything. A Keth overseer was conducting a routine inspection of Deep Shaft 15 when part of the tunnel collapsed. The alien was trapped under a pile of rubble, its legs crushed, and its breathing apparatus damaged. Protocol dictated that human workers should continue their tasks and wait for rescue teams to arrive. The neural collars should have prevented them from taking any unauthorized action. But Marcus saw David Kim glance toward the trapped overseer, then make a decision that should have been impossible. David dropped his extraction tool and moved toward the rubble pile. His neural collar sparked and hummed as it tried to stop him, but somehow he pushed through the control signals. With his bare hands, he began pulling rocks away from the injured alien. Other workers joined him, their collars struggling to maintain control as some deep-seated human instinct overrode the neural programming. Within minutes, they had freed the Keth overseer and stabilized its injuries until help arrived. The overseer survived, but the incident raised questions that rippled all the way up the hegemony chain of command. How had the humans been able to override their neural collars? Was there some fundamental flaw in the control system? Were other human prisoners similarly capable of resistance? That night, Marcus lay in his bunk and thought about what he had witnessed. The neural collars weren't perfect. They could suppress human behavior, but they couldn't completely eliminate the deeper drives that made humans human. Compassion, sacrifice, the instinct to help others even at personal cost. These things ran too deep to be simply switched off by alien technology. For the first time in over 3 years, Marcus felt something that the collar couldn't suppress: hope. If David could override the neural programming to save a Keth overseer, what else might be possible? How many other humans throughout the galaxy were fighting the same quiet battle against their electronic leashes? But hope was dangerous in a place like this. The hegemony tolerated no resistance, no matter how small. If they suspected that the neural collars were failing, they would take steps to ensure complete control. Neural adjustment would be the least of their concerns. They might decide that humans were too dangerous to keep alive at all. As Marcus drifted off to sleep, he made a silent promise to the man he used to be. He would find a way to fight back. He would find a way to break these chains, not just for himself, but for every human suffering under hegemony rule. The aliens had made one critical mistake. They had left him alive, and Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Chun had never learned how to surrender. The war wasn't over. It had just been waiting for the right moment to begin again. The morning after David Kim saved the Keth Overseer, everything changed in Deep Shaft 15. Marcus noticed it immediately as he descended into the tunnels. The usual Keth supervisors had been replaced by Vorth warriors. The massive aliens could barely fit in the larger tunnel sections, their armored exoskeletons scraping against the rock walls as they moved. The presence of elite hegemony forces in a simple mining operation meant someone higher up the chain of command was concerned. Very concerned. Marcus kept his head down and continued his work, chipping away at crystal formations while his mind raced through the implications. Elena Rodriguez was working the same section, her skilled hands operating the extraction equipment with a mechanical precision demanded by her neural collar. But when she thought no one was looking, Marcus caught her studying the Vorth guards with the analytical mind of the engineer she used to be. She was cataloging weaknesses, noting patrol patterns, gathering intelligence out of pure instinct. The crystals they were mining weren't just valuable, they were strategic. These particular formations contained rare elements used in hegemony quantum processors and hyperspace navigation systems. Without them, the alien empire's technological superiority would begin to erode. Marcus realized that this wasn't just a labor camp. It was one of the most critical resource extraction sites in the galaxy, which meant the humans here weren't just prisoners. They were potential weapons aimed at the heart of hegemony infrastructure. 3 days passed before the first probe arrived. Marcus was deep in Tunnel Section C when he heard the commotion echoing through the shafts. Voices speaking in rapid Keth, the heavy footsteps of Vorth warriors, and underneath it all, a sound he hadn't heard in years, the whine of military-grade scanner equipment. The neural collar around his throat tightened automatically as his stress level spiked. The device was designed to suppress emotional reactions that might lead to resistance, but Marcus had learned to work around its programming over the years. He let his breathing slow, forced his heart rate down, and projected the mental state of a broken man who had accepted his fate. But inside, Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Chun was analyzing the tactical situation with crystal clarity. The scanner team consisted of 2 Keth technicians and a hegemony analyst, one of the gray-skinned aliens who specialized in behavioral prediction and threat assessment. They were working their way through each tunnel systematically, checking neural collar data against biological responses. They were looking for humans whose inner thoughts didn't match their outward compliance. Marcus continued his work as the team approached his section. The extraction tool felt heavy in his hands, and he fought the urge to calculate how much damage he could do with it before the Vorth guards cut him down. Instead, he focused on appearing utterly broken, just another human ground down by years of servitude. The scanner passed over him with barely a pause. His neural collar reported optimal compliance. His biometrics showed the expected patterns of a subjugated worker, and his work efficiency remained within acceptable parameters. To the aliens, he looked exactly like what they expected to see, a defeated enemy who posed no threat to their operations. But Elena Rodriguez was a different story. When the scanner swept over her position, it lingered for nearly 30 seconds. Marcus could see the analyst studying the readouts with growing interest, comparing them to baseline data from her neural collar. Elena's hands never stopped working. Her face showed no change in expression, but something in her biometric signature was raising red flags. This one shows anomalous patterns, the analyst announced to its team. Neural activity suggests significant cognitive resistance to collar programming. The Keth technicians moved closer, running additional scans while Elena continued her work as if nothing was happening. But Marcus could see the tension in her shoulders, the the slight tremor in her hands that spoke of a mind fighting desperately against electronic chains. "Shall we initiate neural adjustment protocols?" one of the technicians asked. The analyst studied Elena for a long moment, its large eyes reflecting no emotion as it weighed her fate. Neural adjustment would strip away everything that made her who she was, leaving behind a hollow shell that could follow orders, but no longer think or dream or hope. Negative, the analyst finally decided. Maintain surveillance. Document all deviations from baseline behavior. If resistance patterns increase, then we will proceed with adjustment. They moved on to the next section, leaving Elena to continue her work under the watchful eyes of the Vorth guards. But Marcus had seen the fear in her eyes, quickly suppressed but unmistakable. She knew how close she had come to having her mind wiped clean. That evening in the barracks, the atmosphere was different. Word had spread about the scanner teams and what they were looking for. The humans moved even more mechanically than usual, each one terrified that some stray thought or feeling might mark them for neural adjustment. Marcus lay on his bunk and stared at the ceiling, thinking about the impossible situation they faced. The hegemony's control seemed absolute. Neural collars that suppressed resistance, guards that could kill them without effort, scanner technology that could detect the slightest sign of defiance. How could any human hope to fight against such overwhelming advantages? But then he remembered something from his military training, a lesson learned in the mountains of Afghanistan decades ago. The strongest fortress always had a weakness, and the most advanced technology could be turned against its creators if you understood how it worked. The key was finding the right pressure point and applying force at exactly the right moment. Over the following weeks, Marcus began to pay closer attention to the hegemony operations. He studied guard rotation patterns, memorized the locations of critical equipment, and noted which areas had minimal surveillance. His neural collar registered none of this as suspicious behavior because he framed it all as necessary job-related observation. A good worker needed to understand his environment. After all, the breakthrough came from an unexpected source. David Kim, the Special Forces operator who had saved the Keth Overseer, was working in the same section as Marcus when a piece of extraction equipment malfunctioned. As they waited for technicians to arrive, David began examining the device with the professional interest of someone who had spent years working with complex machinery. "Neural interface coupling," he murmured, barely loud enough for Marcus to hear. Same principle as the collars, just scaled down for equipment control. Marcus felt his pulse quicken as he understood the implication. The hegemony used the same basic neural interface technology for both controlling their human slaves and operating their industrial equipment. If someone understood the underlying principles well enough, they might be able to find vulnerabilities in both systems. But understanding the technology was only the first step. They needed someone with the expertise to actually exploit those vulnerabilities, and they needed to do it without triggering the sophisticated monitoring systems that watch their every move. The answer came from Sarah Mitchell, the former CIA analyst who had been captured while organizing resistance cells. During her years of intelligence work, she had developed techniques for communicating sensitive information in environments where every word was monitored. Over the course of several days, she used a combination of subtle gestures, deliberate equipment placement, and carefully timed work patterns to convey complex technical information to the group. The plan that emerged was audacious in its simplicity. The neural collars that kept them enslaved were connected to a central control network that managed all human workers in the facility. If they could access that network and introduce the right kind of disruption, they might be able to create a brief window where the collars lost their hold on human minds. But the control center was located in the most heavily guarded section of the complex, surrounded by Vorth warriors and protected by every security measure the hegemony could devise. Getting inside would require a distraction so significant that would draw guards away from their posts. Elena Rodriguez provided the answer to that problem. As an engineer, she had been studying the mining operations power distribution system during her off hours, ostensibly trying to improve efficiency as any good worker should. What she had discovered was that the entire facility depended on a single fusion reactor located in the center of the complex. The reactor was heavily shielded and protected by multiple safety systems designed to be absolutely foolproof against any conceivable accident or sabotage attempt. But Elena had found something the hegemony designers hadn't considered: a resonance frequency in the crystal extraction equipment that, if synchronized properly, could create harmonic interference in the reactor's containment field. It wouldn't cause a catastrophic failure. Elena was too good an engineer to risk killing everyone in the facility. But it would trigger every emergency protocol the hegemony had, forcing them to evacuate non-essential personnel and redirect all available guards to contain the apparent crisis. The plan required precise timing and flawless coordination between team members who couldn't speak to each other or even acknowledge the conspiracy existed. They would have one chance, maybe 30 minutes at most, to access the neural control center and disable the collar network before the hegemony realized what was really happening. Marcus felt the familiar weight of command settling on his shoulders as he mentally refined the operation. It had been 3 years since he had led soldiers in a battle, but the skills were still there, buried under layers of electronic suppression, but not destroyed. He would have to trust people he couldn't communicate with directly, coordinate actions across multiple locations, and execute a plan that had almost no margin for error. But for the first time since his capture, Marcus felt like himself again. Not the broken prisoner that the hegemony thought they had created, but Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Chun, a man who had spent his career turning impossible situations into victory through careful planning and precise execution. The hegemony had made their slaves invisible to them, just another piece of industrial equipment to be managed and maintained. They didn't see the intelligence gathering information, the expertise analyzing their weaknesses, or the leadership organizing resistance right under their noses. That blindness would be their downfall. 2 weeks later, Marcus was working in Deep Shaft 15 when he received Elena's signal, a specific pattern of tool placement that meant the harmonic interference calculations were complete and the reactor distraction was ready to implement. Sarah Mitchell had confirmed that the guard rotation schedules provided a viable window for accessing the control center. David Kim had identified the specific equipment modifications needed to disable the neural network. Everything was in place. All that remained was for Marcus to give the order that would either free them all or get them killed in the attempt. As he chipped away at another crystal formation, Marcus thought about the choice that lay ahead. The safe option was to continue as they were, to accept their slavery and hope that someday the hegemony might show mercy. But Marcus had spent too many years in combat zones to believe that mercy ever came from showing weakness. The only way out was through. That night, as he lay in his bunk listening to the quiet breathing of 40 other humans, Marcus made his decision. Tomorrow, they would find out if Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Chun really had been broken by 3 years of captivity, or if the aliens had simply been fooling themselves about the effectiveness of their control systems. The war was about to begin again, and this time, the hegemony wouldn't see it coming until it was too late. The day of the operation dawned gray and cold, with chemical storms brewing on the horizon. Marcus descended into Deep Shaft 15 alongside the other workers, his neural collar humming its usual tune of suppression and control. To any observer, he looked exactly like what he was supposed to be, a broken human going through the motions of another day of forced labor. But underneath the electronic shackles, Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Chun was running through final tactical preparations. The operation would begin at 1,347 hours, during the brief window when guard rotations overlapped and sensor coverage had a 12-minute gap in the northwestern section of the facility. Elena Rodriguez would initiate the harmonic interference sequence at precisely 1349, giving them a 2-minute buffer to get into position. The crystal formations in Section C seemed to mock him as he worked, their prismatic surfaces reflecting the harsh industrial lighting into rainbow patterns that reminded him of better times. Times when humans had looked up at the stars with wonder instead of being dragged to them in chains. Times when the name Marcus Chun had meant something more than prisoner classification 7749 Delta. At 1,330 hours, David Kim dropped his extraction tool in what appeared to be an accident. The metallic clang echoed through the tunnel, and he bent to retrieve it while positioning his body to block the sight lines from the nearest surveillance sensor. In that brief moment of concealment, he made a subtle adjustment to the crystal extraction frequency modulator, the first step in Elena's harmonic interference sequence. 15 minutes later, Sarah Mitchell experienced what looked like equipment failure in Section B. As she worked to clear the apparent jam in her extraction unit, she was actually installing a signal booster that would amplify the interference pattern throughout the facility's power grid. Her years of intelligence training had taught her to perform complex technical operations while appearing to do something completely different. At 1,347 hours exactly, Marcus received Elena's final confirmation signal. A specific pattern of light reflections bounced off her extraction tool. The harmonic calculations were loaded into the modified equipment. The signal boosters were in place, and the resonance frequency had been calibrated to match the reactor's containment field harmonics. Marcus set down his own tools and began moving toward the tunnel exit, timing his movement to coincide with the scheduled work break rotation. The neural collar detected his departure from assigned work area and sent a query pulse to his nervous system. But Marcus had learned to interpret those queries as routine compliance checks rather than direct commands. Section by section, the conspirators moved into position. Elena made her way to the power distribution hub in Sublevel 3, where she would have direct access to the facility's main power grid. David positioned himself near the emergency response equipment cache, ready to create additional distractions if needed. Sarah took up a position in the maintenance tunnels, where she could monitor hegemony communications and provide early warning if their plan was discovered. At 1,349 hours, Elena initiated the harmonic interference sequence. The effect was subtle at first, a barely perceptible vibration in the facility's power systems, a slight fluctuation in the lighting that could easily be attributed to normal variations in the fusion reactor's output. But as the modified crystal extraction equipment throughout the mining complex synchronized to the same resonance frequency, the interference pattern began to amplify. Deep in the facility's core, the fusion reactor's containment field started experiencing harmonic distortions that triggered the first level of automated safety protocols. Warning indicators flickered to life on control panels throughout the complex, and Keth technicians began running diagnostic routines to identify the source of the anomalous readings. Marcus was moving through Service Corridor 7 when the first emergency alerts began sounding. The harmonic interference had reached critical threshold, and the reactor's safety systems were initiating emergency containment procedures. Throughout the facility, non-essential personnel were being evacuated to safe zones while emergency response teams mobilized to deal with the potential crisis. Exactly as planned. The Neural Control Center was located in Administrative Section Alpha, a heavily fortified area that normally housed 20 Vorth guards and multiple layers of security screening. But as the reactor emergency escalated, most of those guards were being redirected to evacuation control and emergency response duties. Marcus reached the service entrance to Administrative Section Alpha at exactly 1,352 hours, finding only 4 Vorth warriors standing guard instead of the usual complement. The massive aliens were clearly agitated by the emergency alerts, their attention focused on their communication devices as they received constant updates about the reactor situation. Moving through the maintenance tunnels beneath the administrative section, Marcus made his way toward the Neural Control Center while Elena's harmonic interference continued to create chaos throughout the facility. The fusion reactor was now in full emergency shutdown mode, with all available personnel focused on preventing what appeared to be an imminent containment failure. The control center itself was a sterile room filled with banks of quantum processors and neural interface equipment that managed the collar network for thousands of human prisoners. Under normal circumstances, it was staffed by at least 6 Keth technicians and protected by multiple security systems. Today, it was empty except for automated monitoring equipment. Marcus slipped inside and immediately began searching for the main neural network interface. His technical knowledge was limited, but Sarah Mitchell had provided detailed instructions on which systems to target. The neural collar network used a distributed control architecture, but all command authorizations had to be processed through a central verification node. If he could introduce the right kind of signal disruption into that node, the entire network would experience what the hegemony would interpret as a massive system failure. The collars would revert to minimal safety protocols, maintaining basic life support functions, but losing their ability to suppress human consciousness and behavior. The interface terminal was protected by quantum encryption and biometric locks, but Marcus had been counting on that. The hegemony security systems were designed to prevent unauthorized access, not to stop someone who had legitimate access credentials. And according to the facility's own records, prisoner classification 7749 Delta was authorized for maintenance work in this section. Marcus plugged in the signal generator that David Kim had constructed from modified extraction equipment, a device that would introduce specific electromagnetic pulses into the neural network's communication protocols. The signal pattern had been carefully calculated to mimic a catastrophic hardware failure rather than deliberate sabotage. As he activated the device, alarms began blaring throughout the administrative section, not because anyone had detected his presence, but because the fusion reactor emergency had escalated to the point where facility evacuation procedures were being implemented. Perfect timing and perfect cover for what came next. The signal generator pulsed once, sending carefully crafted interference through the neural network's primary communication channels. For a brief moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then, throughout the mining facility, 3,000 neural collars simultaneously experienced what their monitoring systems interpreted as critical hardware failure. Emergency protocols engaged immediately, shutting down all non-essential collar functions to preserve basic life support capabilities. The electronic leashes that had held humanity in mental bondage for years suddenly went silent, leaving their wearers free to think and feel and choose for the first time since their capture. In Deep Shaft 15, Elena Rodriguez stopped working and looked around with eyes that were suddenly clear and alert. The fog that had clouded her thoughts for so long lifted like morning mist, revealing the sharp analytical mind that the hegemony had tried so hard to suppress. In Section B, David Kim felt the artificial calm imposed by his neural collar fade away, replaced by the focused intensity of a special forces operator who had just been presented with a target-rich environment full of hostile aliens. Throughout the facility, former soldiers, scientists, engineers, and leaders began to remember who they had been before the hegemony broke them. And every single one of them was very, very angry about what had been done to them. Marcus was making his way back through the service tunnels when he heard the first sounds of real resistance echoing through the facility's corridors. Human voices raised in anger and defiance, the crash of equipment being turned into weapons, the distinctive whine of improvised explosives being detonated in critical infrastructure points. The hegemony guards were completely unprepared for what they suddenly faced. For years, they had grown accustomed to managing compliant prisoners who followed orders without question. They had no experience dealing with 3,000 highly motivated humans who had extensive military, scientific, and technical expertise and absolutely nothing left to lose. In the command center, Keth administrators were frantically trying to understand what was happening. Their monitoring systems showed massive neural collar failures throughout the facility, but the interference patterns suggested equipment malfunction rather than sabotage. The fusion reactor emergency continued to demand their attention, making it difficult to coordinate any kind of effective response. But In a secure communication booth deep in the administrative section, someone was making a very different kind of call. The booth's occupant was neither Keth nor Vorth, but something else entirely. A tall, elegant alien with silver skin and predatory eyes that belonged to the hegemony's most feared intelligence service. Control, this is Agent Zephyr. The alien spoke into its communication device. The mining facility situation is not what it appears to be. The neural collar failures are too widespread and too coordinated to be accidental. We are dealing with organized resistance. The response came back immediately. Confirmed, Agent Zephyr. How do you wish to proceed? Seal the facility. No one gets in or out. And bring me the file on prisoner classification 7749 Delta. I want to know everything about this human's background. Agent Zephyr's fingers moved across a holographic interface, calling up surveillance footage from throughout the facility. The alien watched as humans who had been docile prisoners moments before transformed into a coordinated resistance force, moving with military precision and technical expertise that should have been impossible under neural collar suppression. Control, I'm uploading security footage to your analysis department. I believe we may have significantly underestimated human psychological resistance to neural programming. Several individuals are displaying leadership behaviors that suggest their minds were never fully suppressed. As Agent Zephyr continued reviewing the footage, one particular human caught its attention. A man moving through service corridors with tactical awareness that marked him as former military, someone who understood how to navigate hostile environments and avoid detection. The alien enhanced the image and ran it through identification protocols. The results made Agent Zephyr's blood run cold. Prisoner classification 7749 Delta was Marcus Chun, former lieutenant colonel in the human military and one of the most effective resistance leaders during Earth's occupation. A man the hegemony had supposedly broken 3 years ago through intensive psychological conditioning and neural collar programming. Control. Agent Zephyr spoke with new urgency. We have a Priority 1 security breach. Marcus Chun is alive, functional, and actively leading resistance operations. Recommend immediate implementation of Sterilization Protocol 7. Sterilization Protocol 7 meant the complete elimination of all human life in the facility, followed by orbital bombardment to ensure nothing survived. It was a measure of last resort, used only when the hegemony faced threats that could not be contained through conventional means. But even as Agent Zephyr spoke those words, it knew the situation had already gone beyond the point where simple sterilization would solve the problem. If humans could overcome neural collar programming through psychological resistance alone, then every human prison facility in the galaxy might be vulnerable to similar uprisings. The implications were staggering. There were millions of human prisoners throughout hegemony space, all of them supposedly broken and controlled through neural collar technology. If even a small percentage of them retained the capacity for organized resistance, they represented a threat that could bring down the Empire from within. For the first time in its long career, Agent Zephyr felt something that its species rarely experienced: genuine fear. The humans had been beaten, enslaved, and scattered across 1,000 worlds, but they had never truly been broken. And now they were remembering how to fight. In the tunnels beneath the mining facility, Marcus Chun smiled grimly as he listened to the sounds of battle echoing through the complex. The hegemony had made a critical error in their assessment of human nature. They had assumed that technological superiority automatically translated to psychological dominance. They were about to learn how wrong they had been. The revolution Marcus had sparked was spreading faster than wildfire through the mining facility. In the 2 hours since the neural collar network had failed, 3,000 humans had transformed from broken prisoners into an organized resistance force that was systematically dismantling hegemony control throughout the complex. Marcus emerged from the service tunnels to find the main corridor of Administrative Section Alpha in chaos. Dead Keth overseers lay scattered across the floor, their bodies torn apart by improvised weapons crafted from mining equipment. Former human prisoners were moving in coordinated teams, clearing rooms with military precision, while others worked to secure vital resources and intelligence. Elena Rodriguez had taken control of the facility's communication center, her engineering expertise allowing her to monitor hegemony transmissions and coordinate resistance activities across different sections of the complex. The woman who had been a broken prisoner just hours before now commanded a nerve center that was becoming the beating heart of a full-scale rebellion. "Marcus," Elena called out as he approached her position. "We got serious problems incoming. Long-range sensors are showing hegemony battle cruisers moving toward our position. Estimated arrival time is 6 hours." 6 hours. That wasn't much time to consolidate their gains and prepare for what would undoubtedly be a devastating counterattack. The hegemony didn't tolerate rebellion, and they had the firepower to sterilize the entire planet if necessary. "What's our tactical situation?" Marcus asked, slipping back into the command mindset that had served him so well during the Earth resistance. "We control approximately 60% of the facility, including all primary mining equipment and the fusion reactor. David Kim's teams have secured the armory and are distributing weapons to anyone with military training. Sarah Mitchell has established intelligence cells that are monitoring hegemony communications and identifying their remaining strongholds." Marcus studied the holographic display that showed the current state of the battle. The humans had succeeded in fragmenting hegemony control, but the aliens still held several critical positions, including the orbital communication array and the primary spaceport. As long as the hegemony controlled those assets, they could call in reinforcements and prevent any human escape attempts. "What about casualties?" Marcus asked, though he dreaded the answer. "Light on our side. Maybe 50 wounded, only 12 confirmed dead. But, Marcus, we've killed over 300 hegemony personnel. This isn't just a prison break anymore. This is a declaration of war." Marcus nodded grimly. There would be no negotiating their way out of this situation, no possibility of mercy from their former captors. The hegemony would see the uprising as an existential threat that required complete elimination. Every human in the facility was now marked for death. But that also meant they had nothing left to lose. "Give me a direct line to all section commanders," Marcus ordered. "It's time to expand our operational scope." Within minutes, Marcus was addressing the leadership of the human resistance through Elena's improvised communication network. Former soldiers, scientists, engineers, and intelligence operatives who had been scattered across a dozen different work details were now coordinating as a unified force. "Listen carefully," Marcus began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had led men into impossible battles and brought them home alive. "The hegemony response fleet will arrive in 6 hours with enough firepower to glass this entire planet. Our only chance of survival is to capture their orbital assets before reinforcements arrive." The plan he outlined was audacious beyond belief. The humans would use the facility's industrial equipment to construct makeshift spacecraft capable of reaching orbital altitude. Once there, they would attempt to capture hegemony vessels and turn the aliens' own technology against them. It should have been impossible. Humans had no experience with hegemony spacecraft design, no understanding of their propulsion systems or weapons technology. But Marcus was counting on something the aliens had overlooked: human adaptability and the desperate ingenuity of people fighting for their lives. Sarah Mitchell had been monitoring intercepted communications and had identified a critical weakness in the hegemony position. The orbital defense platforms were minimally staffed, relying primarily on automated systems to protect against external threats. They weren't designed to deal with attacks launched from the planet's surface by what the aliens considered primitive industrial equipment. "David, I need you to take 50 of our best technical people and start converting the heavy mining transports into orbital assault vehicles," Marcus ordered. "Elena, work with the engineers to modify the fusion reactors for spacecraft propulsion. Sarah, I want complete intelligence on every hegemony vessel in orbit, including crew complements and defensive capabilities. As his subordinates dispersed to carry out their assignments, Marcus allowed himself a moment to consider the magnitude of what they were attempting. In 6 hours, they would either be free or they would all be dead. There was no middle ground, no possibility of compromise. But even as he thought about the odds they faced, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years: the pure exhilaration of command in combat. For the first time since his capture, he wasn't just surviving or enduring. He was fighting back with everything he had, leading others who shared his refusal to accept defeat. The next 4 hours were a blur of frantic activity as the human resistance transformed from a prison uprising into something that resembled an actual military force. Mining equipment was stripped down and rebuilt into weapons of war. Industrial fabrication units churned out improvised armor and ammunition. Scientists who had been extracting crystals that morning were now calculating orbital trajectories and weapons targeting solutions. The hegemony forces remaining in the facility made several attempts to retake critical areas, but they were facing an enemy they didn't understand. Every human who had been freed from neural collar control brought decades of specialized knowledge and experience to the fight. Engineers who understood complex systems, soldiers who knew tactics and weapons, intelligence operatives who could predict enemy movements and exploit weaknesses. Agent Zephyr had barricaded itself in a secure section of the command center, desperately trying to coordinate a defense against enemies who seemed to anticipate every hegemony move before it was made. The aliens' reports to Hegemony Command painted an increasingly grim picture of the situation. The humans are not behaving like escaped prisoners, Agent Zephyr reported during its final transmission. They are operating with military precision and technical expertise that suggests extensive pre-planning. Their leader appears to be Marcus Chun, whose psychological profile indicated complete neural subjugation. The response from Hegemony Command was swift and brutal. All personnel are to evacuate to minimum safe distance. Orbital bombardment will commence upon arrival of the response fleet. But Agent Zephyr never received that message. David Kim's assault teams had finally breached the secure command center, and the alien intelligence operative became another casualty in humanity's desperate bid for freedom. With 2 hours remaining until the Hegemony fleet arrived, Marcus stood in the facility's main hangar watching the final preparations for their orbital assault. 12 heavy mining transports had been converted into makeshift spacecraft, their cargo bays filled with armed humans and improvised weapon systems. It was a ragtag fleet that would have been laughable under normal circumstances. But these weren't normal circumstances, and the people preparing to crew those vessels weren't ordinary humans. They were survivors who had endured years of slavery and degradation, and they were ready to die rather than submit to alien rule again. Elena Rodriguez approached him as he reviewed the final mission parameters. Marcus, I've been analyzing the orbital defense grid, and I think I found something important. The Hegemony ships are using the same neural interface technology for their control systems that they used in our collars. Marcus felt his pulse quicken as he understood the implication. You think we can hack their ships? Not hack exactly, but if we can get close enough to establish a direct connection, we might be able to introduce the same kind of signal disruption that freed us from the neural collars. Their automated systems would interpret it as a massive hardware failure and shut down non-essential functions. It was a long shot, but it was also their best hope of turning the odds in their favor. The improvised human spacecraft were no match for Hegemony warships in direct combat, but if they could disable enemy systems through electronic warfare, they might be able to level the playing field. How close do we need to get? Marcus asked. Physical contact would be ideal, but we should be able to establish interface connection within 50 meters of their hull. 50 meters. That meant the human crews would have to survive direct engagement with Hegemony point defense systems long enough to get within spitting distance of alien warships. Most of them wouldn't make it, but even one successful connection might be enough to turn the tide of battle. As the countdown reached its final hour, Marcus gathered the crew leaders for a final briefing. These were the people who would be flying jury-rigged spacecraft in a combat against one of the most advanced military forces in the galaxy. They were engineers and miners and maintenance workers who had volunteered to become fighter pilots with less than 6 hours of preparation. "I won't lie to you," Marcus told them. "Most of us probably won't survive the next few hours. But if we succeed, we'll prove something important to every human in the galaxy. That no matter how advanced their technology, no matter how complete their control seems to be, the hegemony can be beaten." As if summoned by his words, proximity alarms began blaring throughout the facility. The hegemony response fleet had arrived ahead of schedule, their massive warships dropping out of hyperspace in perfect formation above the planet. Through the hangar's observation windows, Marcus could see the alien vessels beginning their descent toward bombardment altitude. In minutes, they would begin sterilizing the surface with weapons that could turn solid rock into plasma. "All crews to your ships," Marcus ordered. "It's time to show these aliens what humans are really capable of." As he climbed into the command seat of the lead transport, Marcus felt the weight of history settling on his shoulders. In the next few hours, humanity would either take its first real step toward freedom, or it would die fighting on a forgotten world in the depths of space. Either way, the hegemony would finally learn why humans had once been called warriors and why Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Chun had earned a different name during the darkest days of Earth's occupation. The name whispered in fear among alien intelligence services, spoken in hushed tones by hegemony commanders who had faced him in battle and barely escaped with their lives. The Reaper. And today the harvest would begin. The improvised human fleet launched into the dark sky of Kepler 442b just as the first hegemony bombardment beams began scorching the planet's surface. Marcus gripped the control yoke of his converted mining transport, feeling the crude acceleration systems strain against the planet's gravity as they climbed toward orbital altitude. Behind him, 11 other makeshift spacecraft followed in loose formation, their crews manning weapons systems cobbled together from industrial equipment and mining explosives. They were rising to face the most technologically advanced military force in the galaxy with tools that had been designed to extract crystals from rock. "Elena, give me a tactical update," Marcus commanded through their improvised communication system. Hegemony fleet consists of 3 heavy cruisers and 8 destroyer-class vessels. Elena's voice crackled back from her position aboard Transport 7. "They're maintaining orbital bombardment formation, which means they're not expecting any resistance from surface-based forces." That tactical blindness was exactly what Marcus had been counting on. The hegemony had grown complacent after years of managing subjugated populations that couldn't fight back. They had protocol for dealing with external threats and space-based enemies, but no experience with industrial equipment being weaponized against them from planetary surfaces. As they climbed through the upper atmosphere, Marcus could see the alien warships growing larger through his viewport. The vessels were massive, each one easily 10 times the size of the largest human transport. Their hulls gleamed with energy shields and defensive armor that could withstand concentrated fire from conventional weapons. But conventional weapons weren't what the humans were carrying. "David, what's the status on our special packages?" Marcus asked. "All signal generators are active and ready for deployment," David Kim replied from Transport 3. "Elena's calculations show we need to achieve direct hull contact for maximum effectiveness." Direct hull contact. That meant ramming speed against warships that could vaporize them with a single weapons burst. It was a suicide mission, but then, again, they were all dead anyway if they didn't succeed. The first hegemony destroyer to notice the approaching human spacecraft responded exactly as Marcus had predicted. It turned its point defense systems toward what it undoubtedly saw as debris or malfunctioning equipment rising from the planet below. The alien crew probably assumed they were dealing with industrial accidents caused by their bombardment. That assumption lasted exactly 12 seconds, until Transport 4 opened fire with mining lasers that had been overpowered and focused into coherent beams capable of cutting through light armor. The destroyer's shields flared as the improvised weapons struck home, and suddenly, every alien vessel in orbit was scrambling to identify and engage the unexpected threat. All transports, execute attack pattern Delta, Marcus ordered. Stay low and fast. Use the planet's gravity well to mask your approach vectors. The human ships scattered across three-dimensional space, each one following a carefully calculated trajectory designed to bring them into contact with specific hegemony vessels. The aliens had superior firepower and defensive systems, but they were fighting an enemy that didn't behave according to any tactical doctrine they understood. Transport 9, crewed by former Special Forces operators, dove straight toward a heavy cruiser's ventral section while firing everything they had. The improvised weapons barely scratched the alien ship's armor, but they served their purpose by drawing the attention of every defensive turret in that section. While the cruiser's guns tracked the obvious target, Transport 2 approached from the opposite direction, using the larger ship's own hull as cover from its defensive systems. Marcus watched his tactical display as the first human ship achieved its objective. Transport 2 made contact with the heavy cruiser's hull, and immediately Elena's signal generator began transmitting the neural interface disruption pattern directly into the alien ship's control systems. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. Throughout the hegemony vessel, automated systems that had been operating flawlessly for decades suddenly began experiencing what they interpreted as cascading hardware failures. Emergency protocols engaged, shutting down non-essential functions and isolating compromised systems to prevent further damage. In the cruiser's command center, Keth officers stared in horror at displays showing catastrophic system failures throughout their ship. Weapons systems went offline, navigation computers crashed, and life support systems reverted to emergency backup mode. Within minutes, one of the most advanced warships in the hegemony fleet had been reduced to a drifting hulk. Signal disruption successful on primary target, Elena reported. The cruiser is dead in space. But the victory came at a terrible price. Transport 2 had been vaporized by point defense fire just seconds after making contact, its crew dying in a brief flash of superheated plasma. Transport 9 met the same fate, caught by defensive turrets as it tried to disengage from its attack run. Marcus felt the familiar weight of command casualties, but this wasn't the time for grief. The battle was still raging, and every second they delayed meant more human lives lost. All remaining transports prioritized destroyer targets, he ordered. The cruisers are too heavily defended for direct assault. The human ships adapted their tactics immediately, focusing on the smaller hegemony vessels that had fewer defensive systems and could be approached more safely. Transport 7, with Elena aboard, managed to make contact with the destroyer's engine section, transmitting the neural disruption signal directly into its propulsion control systems. The alien ship's engines died instantly, leaving it spinning helplessly through space as its crew struggled to understand what had happened. Emergency systems attempted to restart the propulsion unit, but the neural interface disruption had corrupted the control protocols so thoroughly that any attempt to engage the engines resulted in immediate shutdown. One by one, the human transports completed their suicide missions. Transport 6 disabled the destroyer's weapons systems before being destroyed by fire from a nearby cruiser. Transport 8 penetrated a heavy cruiser's defenses and shut down its shield generators, leaving the massive ship vulnerable to follow-up attacks. Marcus found himself commanding the final assault with only 4 transports remaining. Half his people were dead, but they had managed to disable or cripple 6 of the 11 hegemony vessels. The odds were finally starting to shift in humanity's favor. Transport 1, this is Hegemony Command Vessel Dominion. A translated voice suddenly spoke through their communication system. You will identify yourself and cease hostile actions immediately. Marcus felt a cold smile cross his face as he responded. Hegemony Command Vessel Dominion. This is Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Chun, formerly of the Earth Defense Forces. You can go straight to hell. There was a long pause before the alien voice came back, and this time Marcus could hear something that sounded almost like fear in the translated words. Marcus Chun, the Reaper. We were told you had been neutralized. Reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated, Marcus replied. But yours are about to become very accurate. He threw his transport into a diving attack run toward the command vessel, pushing the improvised engines beyond their safety limits as defensive turrets swiveled to track his approach. The alien weapons fire came close enough to sear the hull of his ship, but years of combat experience had taught Marcus how to fly through defensive patterns that would destroy less experienced pilots. As he closed the final distance to the Hegemony command ship, Marcus activated his personal communication channel to address the surviving human crews. Elena, David, Sarah, all of you, it's been an honor serving with you again. Whatever happens next, remember that today, humanity proved it could never be truly broken. His transport slammed into the command vessel's primary control section at maximum velocity, the improvised armor plating crumpling like paper as he drove the signal generator directly into the heart of the alien ship's neural interface systems. In the final seconds before his own death, Marcus felt a moment of savage satisfaction as he watched the Dominion's control systems cascade into failure. The massive command cruiser went dark as its neural networks crashed, leaving it drifting powerless in space alongside its crippled sister ships. Throughout the Hegemony fleet, crews struggled to regain control of vessels that no longer responded to their commands. In the wreckage of the mining facility below, the surviving humans watched through telescopic equipment as their improvised fleet completed its impossible mission. 11 Hegemony warships hung dead in space, their crews trapped aboard vessels that had become their prisons. Elena Rodriguez had survived the battle aboard one of the 3 remaining transports, and she found herself in command of a situation that no one could have imagined just days before. A ragtag group of escaped prisoners had not only defeated a Hegemony fleet, but they had also developed a weapon that could potentially liberate every human slave in the galaxy. All surviving humans, this is Elena Rodriguez. She transmitted to both the orbital survivors and the ground-based resistance. Marcus is gone, but his mission continues. We now possess the technology to disable Hegemony neural control systems on a massive scale. Over the next several hours, as rescue ships arrived to evacuate the surviving human crews, Elena began formulating plans that would have seemed impossible just a week earlier. The neural interface disruption technology could be transmitted as a signal across interstellar distances, potentially reaching every human prisoner facility in Hegemony space simultaneously. The liberation of Kepler 442b was just the beginning. 6 months later, the name Marcus Chun had become legend throughout the galaxy. Human resistance cells on 1,000 worlds whispered stories of the Reaper, the man who had broken his chains and taught an empire that humanity could never truly be enslaved. The neural disruption signal that Elena had perfected based on Marcus's initial breakthrough spread like wildfire through Hegemony space. On world after world, human prisoners felt their neural collars go silent as the electronic chains that had bound them for years suddenly failed. The uprising that followed made the Kepler 442b incident look like a minor skirmish. Millions of humans who had been considered broken and harmless suddenly remembered who they were and what they were capable of. Scientists, soldiers, engineers, and leaders who had been scattered across the galaxy as slave labor began coordinating resistance efforts that brought entire star systems to their knees. The Hegemony, which had ruled through technological superiority and psychological control for centuries, discovered that they had made a critical error in their understanding of human nature. They had assumed that breaking the body and suppressing the mind would be enough to eliminate the human spirit. Marcus Chun had taught them otherwise. In the research facility where Marcus had spent 3 years as a test subject, Hegemony scientists reviewed their data with growing horror. Their experiments have been designed to identify and eliminate human resistance capabilities, but they had failed to understand what made humans truly dangerous. It wasn't their technology or their weapons that made humans a threat to galactic peace. It was their refusal to accept defeat, their willingness to sacrifice everything for the chance to strike back at oppression, and their ability to turn any tool or system into a weapon when pushed to the breaking point. The neural collars that were supposed to be unbreakable had been broken by human ingenuity and determination. The prison facilities that were supposed to be escape-proof had been turned into resistance bases. The carefully controlled slave populations had become the heart of a rebellion that threatened to bring down an empire. And at the center of it all was the memory of a man who had been silenced and bound, but never truly broken. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Chun, the Reaper, had died as he lived, fighting against impossible odds and proving that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't advanced technology or superior firepower. It was the simple, stubborn refusal to surrender. As the first liberated human worlds declared their independence and began forming the Free Human Alliance, they established a tradition that would continue for generations. Every military unit, every resistance cell, every group of humans fighting for their freedom would begin their operations with the same words that Marcus Chun had spoken to his final crew. "It's been an honor serving with you." And across the galaxy, in the depths of space where freedom was more valuable than life itself, humans would remember the man who had taught them that no chains could hold the human spirit forever. The Reaper's harvest had only just begun.